Hello and welcome to another edition of the Learning Reinvented Podcast, brought to you by myself, James Poletyllo, and the team at The Learning Effect. Today we're joined by Ket Patel. Ket, welcome to the podcast. Do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and what you do?
I would love to. Yeah, James, thanks a lot for inviting me on. So my name's Ket Patel. I'm an independent change and transformation consultant with an organisation called Marlowe Consulting. I'm also the change co-lead for the Change Management Institute, which is a kind of global professional body for change practitioners everywhere. And yeah, that's sort of me in a nutshell. I've kind of come from projects in tech and finance sort of a number of years ago, and I've progressed into sort of organizational design and kind of projects around, tech implementation in a wider context. Oh yeah.
So Ket, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is there's a lot of synergies between change and learning. Often we see that, learning is about trying to drive some sort of personal change, possibly organizational change. And we've had a few conversations over the past few months about what's really evolved in those functions. So, COVID has obviously changed the world. Apparently, it's changed everything that we both do. So, what's your view on the impact that COVID has had on change management?
It's a really difficult one. One of we've been talking to members quite a bit over the past 6 months of being in COVID. In fact, we've been kind of weekly sessions with members just asking, what do you think has changed? I think the biggest observation appears that change has become easy. We went from organizations, employing many people to try and help navigate change more successfully for their users, for their clients, their customers, their employees, and then overnight was thrown into a situation no one really could predict, and were forced to think of new ways to work. And seemingly people got on with it quite successfully. There's a lot of talk of productivity remaining high, which I haven't seen enough evidence to be. Yeah, it might have been high, but the thing for me that keeps coming up is that this, change is easy now because we've done it, and I really don't think people have recognized that when a really fundamental principle of change is that you need capacity to take on change, because more often than not, most people are 100% occupied with doing all the things they're doing right now. So to change something, you need to create some capacity in yourself, and you need to also sort of understand what those things you need to take forward are. So what is it you want to commit that time to? And when COVID came about, everybody had time and everybody was given space to think about the change they needed to make at home, and make work happen. And so it seemed easier than it was. And that's not what normally happens in an organization. A small pocket of an organization is asked to change, whilst the rest of it continues to go hell for leather. And so the idea that just because we did this one big bang type change and everyone got on board because they sort of had to, they didn't have a choice, that we've all of a sudden figured out how to make organizations change is somewhat, there's definitely, for me, there's some dissonance between those two things. So yeah, that keeps coming back in my mind, that change has become easy all of a sudden. I don't know if it's the same for learning, right? Like, I don't know if all of a sudden we've learned overnight how to just consume knowledge and commit it to our brains.
I think there's absolutely synergies between the two, because, if you roll back to the end of last year, so end of 2019, a lot of learning is still classroom based. A lot of it is still coming out to take time out of the classroom. A lot of the learning profession is against online learning. You can't possibly achieve the same things. Now, suddenly people have been forced into that space. So, you can no longer, or you could no longer go to a classroom to digest information. You could no longer fly people around the world for your induction. So how are you going to do those things in a different way? And it's suddenly forced everyone online, and people have become an expert or a supposed expert within what they do. So, you know, you've got face-to-face trainers who now have flipped all their materials onto Zoom and are now experts in putting online learning programs together. And that's done, that's dusted. We now know how to do that. And I think, you know, you talked about the time and the space. It's interesting when lockdown happened for those of us who didn't have to go in and do real jobs. You know, some people have continued working in healthcare or the police or other functions throughout, but those of us who almost had that month, 2 months where everyone said they were being busy, but I think people were being busy trying to work out how they did their job, not particularly productive. And so that possibly gave us the space to learn how to, you know, do an online conference call or a Zoom meeting or put together online materials. But I don't think it's fundamentally changed what we do. And I think one of my concerns is that we roll out of this, and sometimes in a crisis you put on a sticking plaster, or you find something that's going to work for a period of time. Now, you know, is this going to continue? Are we going to find a different balance? Whatever happens next, I think people sometimes think we've done it, it's the right thing. I don't think that enough people are actually looking at what is it that needs to evolve, what does need to change, rather than just tick a box. We've now fallen into a nice, comfortable space of some online materials and Zoom without really questioning whether that's good enough.
I think that's a really interesting point as well, right? Like this, how easily we slip into this sort of tick box exercise of, well, we've done it now, right? Let's just roll it out more. Let's just do more of this stuff. And we, like, one of the things I was quite interested by, an observation that was made when I was talking to some members a few weeks ago, where it was like, we sometimes forget to recognize what isn't changing and what is really valuable and we should keep. Like, you don't have to throw everything else that we used to do away. And one of the things that I keep coming back to is I'm a hugely sociable person, and I've hardly met the amount of people I would normally meet in 6 months and catch up with face to face. And I don't know if you agree, but like, I personally learn best when I'm sort of throwing ideas around with someone in a face-to-face way. I love stick notes. Like, I love having to kind of touch and play with things and push stuff around. And I get you can do it digitally. I'm not saying that doesn't have value. Like, it can save huge amounts in travel costs and things like that for companies. But what I'm saying is there's still value in it. Like, that human connection around curiosity and an idea to drive new ideas. Like, for me, it's like, I don't know, I don't get the same feeling from taking this online. And maybe it's that I've not been in the right things, but I still feel like I'm holding fort with these ideas around doing stuff digitally and virtually. But I do want to create the space where we come together physically and we talk about stuff, and we really do sort of connect, not just about the idea we've come to talk about, but also around, you know, other parts of our lives as well, what we've been up to, what we're doing, you know, seeing people. That, you know, 2 dimensions is great. I get to see people, but I want to be around other people, because you can, you know, feeling that energy is important, you know, especially when you're getting new ideas, or you're learning, you're consolidating stuff, or you're struggling with something. I think being able to feel that from other people is quite an important thing. And even that, it feels a bit wishy. I know that sounds wishy-washy, right? Like, and everyone sort of says about change management that it's a bit, you know, like, it's a bit art more than science. It's a bit emotional. It's not. There's some really practical, physical stuff you have to do, right? But it is about motivating behavioral change, right? It is about engaging with people in a way that makes them want to do something differently. And I don't think you don't get the same output always, I think, if you're just going to solely focus on a virtual environment. But I have seen some great courses that do. So, yeah.
I think it's an interesting point, because if you look at, you know, people choosing one or the other, you know, this has almost forced people to experience online for good or for bad. Some people really like it. Some people, it's their natural space. Some people are putting up with it. You know, at the beginning, lots of us were doing it in an environment that wasn't entirely ideal. But as this sort of settles down, you know, it's getting that balance between using that face-to-face time, maybe because it's more restricted or not there for quality time, and maybe not, ignoring that. And that can be inside or outside work. Is your face-to-face time sat when you're on the phone ignoring your family? You've probably had enough of your family now after months and months and months. But again, when we go, when you get those days now with your colleagues, it is about that, those face-to-face moments, about that social connection, about that collaboration. It's maybe not going in, and well, sometimes it is just being able to sit there and shout across to your colleague, what's this, or can you just pop around and help? And I think there's bits that people have really missed. Something that has made me think about something in what we've been through is often where you're at the heart of an organization or at the heart of change, or you're in a physical base, you think about those things because you have those physical touch points in the past, or you still do. You have that opportunity to talk to someone. But as we're working in a more connected world, a more remote world, you may have had colleagues all over the world, all over the country already working remotely. And it's almost made me think a little bit about how good we are at engaging those people, because sometimes if you're driving learning or you're driving change, maybe it sounds great where you are because you're looking at it from your perspective, but it's certainly given me another perspective as to collectively what we see across the piece. And those people who are sat working remotely and we've been experiencing their lives for the last 7 or 8 months, are the things we can learn about that, or is there a happy medium or somewhere in the middle we can come back to?
Maybe it's a question. I don't know if you make a distinction between sort of like consuming information, right, and learning. Like consuming information you can do anyway, like we do it already, our phones, the radio, TV, like we're constantly consuming information. So it just feels like what we've done is we've taken the information part of training and we've enabled it to be consumed a different way. But what we've lost is the learning piece, the knowledge piece, the transfer, the reinforcing of that knowledge to become learning. And that's what I kind of see as a real tussle. Is like I've run so many events and I've been to numerous conferences, and I'm sure you have. The thing that always strikes me when I leave them is, so what? What am I going to do differently with this information? And actually, a bigger question, how many people do something differently with that information? If I was going to, wet finger in the air, I would guess it was less than 10% actually physically end up doing something different from the information they got. So it just becomes more information. And all we're doing is we're losing the opportunity with learning if we continue to push more of it online, I feel, to consolidate that, because what does consolidate it is discussion. What does consolidate it is being around other people and sharing what you took away from it. And maybe even coming back as a group and talking about that again. And I think, like you sort of mentioned it in, needing that time and space away from like whatever distractions you've got. I think that's really important. Like physically bringing yourself out of your day to day, whatever that day to day is, and being plonked with another group of people who are there to learn is a really, like, we don't make enough time for it before COVID. Like how difficult was it to get 1 or 2 days away from work? People always make excuses, but the excuses justified the benefit, right? Like you really needed to be in that room with others to feel that kind of desire to learn this stuff and share that learning experience. And I feel we've probably let go a little bit of the importance of that by taking things virtually. And also, I don't know how easy it is, but look, I could be looking at my phone, I could be tapping away on my other computer right now while we're talking here. So how invested am I in being part of this learning experience? I think that is a challenge. Like sharing knowledge, passing a certification, like that's where a lot of stuff has gone virtual. Don't get me wrong, you can definitely make that effective, probably more effective for the company than it is for the individual, right? Like all of a sudden you can scale. But if we really want to talk about what's beneficial to person learning, then I think you have to be around people. And I think you have to want to reinforce that by having discussion and sharing your curiosity. And you won't do that virtually unless you create those sorts of spaces or you create that sort of learning experience. And you said I don't know if anyone's talking about that. Like everyone's quite happy to just hold stuff on Zoom. But where's the life cycle of the learning?
I think you pull out a really interesting point about fundamentally where there's a problem in learning, because it's almost like winning the lottery sometimes how learning strategies work, because you talk about putting content online, or beforehand having content in a conference. So how many times have you been to a conference and you sit there and you sit through a session and just go, it's not for me, that this is not resonating, this is not hitting anything for me. But maybe it was a good sales pitch, maybe the speaker sounded great, or there was a slick bit of marketing that showed that was what you wanted. And I think there's that balance of sometimes you come out of a session, whether it's online or face to face, and you actually are buzzing because it's been the right time for you. So it could be I go into a talk and it's just not the right time for me. It's the right talk, it's the wrong time. It's just like you said, people often don't take that day out to go to learning because it's a really interesting topic to me, but it's just not the right time because I'm too busy at work, or that was a learning priority 2 or 3 months ago, or I probably don't need to get to that for 6 weeks, and therefore I can put it off because I've got something else that is more pressing or more urgent. So I think it is like the stars aligning, that it needs to be the right thing at the right time, and then there's that almost serendipity of being able to find other people who are equally invested or connected in that experience at the time, to be able to therefore share, have that collaboration, test out those ideas, have a conversation to take that impart of knowledge or that thought-provoking question or whatever it happens to be, to take that forward. And I think unless you get all those things together, in some sort of experience and relevance and purpose that it relates to you, we are really just throwing sand into the ocean and hoping that we'll build a dam. It doesn't, we're not very good at structuring all those things. And I think if you can break it down, so you look at online learning and knowledge sharing, and then how could you use technology or face-to-face or whatever to bring those people together? Because you could be having a brilliant collaboration with someone from the other side of the world if those things align. I think sometimes the medium goes beyond that, so we think it's invested in online or offline, but to me it's those ingredients coming together that's the most important.
And just as you were saying about that sort of, coming together at the right time for what you need, it made me immediately think of what happens for, like, I don't know if you're a DIYer, right? Like, but I occasionally dabble in a bit of DIY. You go on YouTube, right? You can find any video pretty much on anything you might want to do around your home, right? Like, it's that on demand. I've got a need. I don't want to spend all this money or time, and I've got some time to kind of consume maybe that information. I'm willing to take the risk. There's this kind of balance of how much am I willing to pay, how much risk am I willing to take, and how easy is it to consume the information, right? Which YouTube does really well for the DIY, but we don't. I don't know what your experience like. You don't see that sort of on-demand quality platform in an organization for learning. I haven't seen it, and maybe it does exist. But what also strikes me is that we've been, if I think of my own development journey, all the courses that I've ever subscribed to when I was in an organization was sort of not really anything to do with my ongoing development. It was just like, oh, that might be nice to do, or why don't you pick that up? There wasn't that need. And so the stuff I choose to do now is much more needs driven. Like, if I'm interested in a particular topic, that's where I'm going to go and find out where the best course is and which one I should do. And so I think there's this sort of expectation from individuals, employees, right? Like that an organization knows what's best for you, like that you're not part of the, like, picking the right thing, what the interesting area of your learning should be and where you might get it. Instead, you're given this sort of vanilla menu of stuff, right? And you're asked to choose which of these things most interest you. And someone just picks one because they're like, well, they've got to do some training this year, or they don't meet some sort of arbitrary, development milestone. So I feel this whole context of learning in organizations, generally people development, is a sort of a bit sleepwalking, right? Everyone's sort of sleepwalking along their career, apart from those who are really motivated, who go after kind of everything that they need to be successful. Most people are sort of quite happy to turn that treadmill. I don't know, maybe that sounds really harsh, but I don't know. I just, you know, as you were saying, kind of what that future development plan could look like. It could be much more needs-based, you know, much more on demand, much more community-led. These are all things, if I think about what works well in successful change, these are all things that are key pillars of driving an organizational change through. It's happening at a specific point in time. Everyone's aligned. There is support available and on demand for the questions and the challenges you're facing, and you know, you've got a real community that is trying to help drive the change through, right, to make it sustained. They're all like key pillars. So it's sort of like step away from the individual change and make it about the change of the organization, and all of a sudden you look at your learning system, right?
Absolutely. And I think if people are working through what they're doing in learning, you know, having that vanilla menu and having something pushed down onto you because, oh, it's PDP time, or, you know, it's compliance learning, you know, deadline that we all need to sit through and do some clicky learning. It creates a culture where people possibly don't act as they do in the real world, because it creates this passive consumption that I really can't get anything. I'm just fed this, and when I'm fed it, it's not particularly great. So, you know, I'll just go through the motions. But like you said, outside work, suddenly, you know, you've got a DIY problem. You're stuck in the middle of nowhere, and you need to change the tire on your car. You've got an immediate need. The same in change. If you're trying to passively push out a change to people who see no problem in the first place, no real benefit of the solution that you're pushing to them, and other things that are more important, you already know you're on a loser. But you know, so many of our learning strategies appear to be in that place, rather than turning around and going, it's probably not someone in the learning team who knows the answer. I mean, it certainly isn't in most learning teams. You know, sometimes you've had learning people who've been the expert in their field, so they go in to become the sales trainer because they're great at sales. But more often than not, the best person you need to learn from is your sales colleague who's, you know, somewhere else in the organization, who's recently faced that similar challenge, or is actually facing that same challenge at the same moment as you are. Neither of you know the answer, but you're going to put your heads together and you're going to try and come up with something, and you're going to test and you're going to learn, and you're going to, you know, improve as you go. And, you know, I think that those things naturally happen in an organizational change project. I think, where they're successful. You'll get me right.
They don't always happen. They don't naturally happen, right? Like it requires quite a bit of effort. But no, you're spot on. You're spot on. I don't mean to cut you off. Sorry, you were sort of in the throw of quite a poignant moment.
Oh, I was just literally going to say. So you are, you know, you in a change project, you would think that there is some element of the project bringing people together who are invested in it. Therefore, there's some purpose. They're treading uncharted ground, which most learning is. It's uncharted ground. You know, the context of learning is so important. So some online materials that come out and push there need to be contextualized.
Yeah.
Now, in the past, we've taken quite a parental approach to that, of thinking we can contextualize by, you know, either designing so much into materials that try and guess every answer. Well, that's not with the reality of the world we live in. The context is so different. Or else we produce something and we don't help people to understand that it's their job locally to contextualize that. So we can make stuff available to them, but, you know, it's not like we're going to have a Google or a YouTube covering every instance of every job in every organization. So we need to create a platform where people can, within the community, share their knowledge or share their questions, or, you know, have that ability to ask. But I think we're again such a parental, passive approach in so many organizations, where someone pushes something down, that's what you need to do, and it's just not very honest.
I mean, for change, I think the projects I've been involved in, one, there's either no awareness of this sort of transition of of knowledge about what the user will get, right? Like there's sort of almost like it's so obvious that this is a benefit because look, the old system is so bad, or whatever it happens to be, the old way of working is so bad that almost knowledge transfer is sort of almost assumed. So like it's why change, when most people talk about change, they always default to training and comms, because they're kind of like, well, we need to tell people what's coming and we need to support them with what they'll get. Which actually, if most projects did those two things and they did them really well and they gave them adequate time and they did them with sufficient lead time and really listened to what their users and those impacted were saying, projects would significantly increase in success of adoption, right? Like just those two things. So a lot of people would say, oh, change is more than those things, there's a lot more to it, and there is, but I'd be really happy if most organizations would just get those two things like really clear in their mind when they think about a project. But the reality is they don't, and change professionals get brought in quite late to a project to think about, oh, actually we need to realize benefits, and in order to realize benefits we need people to use the thing, and in order for people to use the thing they need to really understand how to use it. So let's get them told and let's get them supported. So like as a profession, I still feel like we're quite far behind project management in terms of kind of maturity of what we do. But if people still recognize those two things are important and we get those things right, we can make a huge impact right straight off the bat with being able to reinforce them. And that's where I think, as you were talking about, like we really leverage subject matter experts, right? Like I can talk about a change, right? But the reality is I was talking to a group of users for a system I'm rolling out at the moment, and they're really busy, particularly the context of what's going on at the moment. Their line of work is hugely impacted by COVID, and they're really busy with process and policy and all these other things that they've got to change, and they're constantly changing, and yet this technology system is coming their way. And their focus when they talk to us was, tell me what I need to do and when I need to do it. Like be really specific and really pointed, because I've only got so much time. And so like one of the things, sort of flipping learning on its head for change transformation programs, is like you have to work so hard for your comms and your training to be targeted and specific and to meet the needs of the users and understand the work that they're currently continuing to occupy all their time, because you're just one of many, right? And you have to create that desire, you have to create that pull from them to take information. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to create that relationship. We're not being a burden, but we're also know that we are the answer to helping them get to adopt a new system or a new way of working. And it's not easy, because people are busy, right? It really fundamentally comes down to, it takes effort to change the way you do something. It takes motivation, and those two things, when you don't ask for them, are very rarely natural. Right, you have to create that desire. So that's for us, it's not an easy slog, and you've really got to commit a huge amount of effort and time, which is massively underestimated, I think, in most projects.
Have you seen it work really well anywhere? So a project where they got the learning and comms bit right?
Well, I would say, like if I took the one I'm working on at the moment, and a number of people would say sort of examples similarly. We've had technology let the rollout of something down. So we said we would get it out on a date, and it ended up slipping. And then when it did get out, it kind of ended up having to be pulled. And we're fighting with the context of, things slip all the time. Things don't always go to the plan we expect them to. But actually managing people's expectations of what's coming and what it means for them is an important part of like the change lead's role. So I would say one of the most successful things we've done, or I've been part of, is that like understanding that the context in which the change has happened, or needs to happen going forward, and constantly asking. Constantly sounds like it's laborious, right? But always being aware that you need to ask, how well is this suiting you, to all of your stakeholders? Where are we not, meeting your needs? And I think that the one I'm working on at the moment is, we're part of quite a big portfolio of projects, and yet the sign of success for me is that no matter the challenges the project faces, the end users go, you know what, like, we really liked what you did. We like the way you approached it. And I can talk about this a little bit, but in this specific example, we worked with the impacted users to say, like, what level of readiness, how long do you need? What sort of lead time do you need to kind of be ready for this? If we're going to roll out a system in a couple of months' time, how much lead time do you specifically want to organize your people? And we sort of batted a few different ideas around. They said, well, look, a slow burn, sort of, 8 to 12 weeks would be perfect for us. You tee us up 12 weeks out, you give us a bit more information, we'll appoint a point person for our particular team. And so we developed this in collaboration with the impacted teams. We developed this 12-week readiness process, right? And that 12-week readiness process was clear to everybody. This is when we're going to come in. This is what we're going to do on these different times. And this is the sorts of information you'll get from us. And everybody was like really clear about what their role was and what our role was in this transition of project team over to them as end users. And even though we were delayed, and even though we ended up pulling it afterwards, everybody loves that approach, that there is a defined timeline in which we will engage them. We will keep them informed. If they're not in that 12 weeks to go live, do you know what? You won't hear anything. You might get some wider knowledge. Everybody loves that transparent approach to what is going to be shared with them. And actually, it's got to the point now where we're duplicating that approach, different periods of readiness for asking teams, but we're duplicating that approach with a number of other projects in the program I'm working on. And that to me is a huge sign of success. Something that nobody knew they needed was proven to have some value, and has proven so much so that we're now expanding it to other places because it's proven. So again, in itself, it's a learning experience, right? Does this work? Does it not work? Oh, it works. Brilliant. Now what more should we do about it? And I think that's the second part of like being, a good agent of change, is that continual need to learn and try. You hear it all the time, try and fail fast, blah, 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 whatever. The point is, like, you are trying to see what is working for the people you're trying to impact and what isn't, and where you can adjust and what you can do to make it easier for them. Because if you make it easier for them, you create the pull to be a little bit easier for them. And therefore, that whole transition of information, from our perspective at least, works much more easily. But yeah, I don't know if that really answered the question of like a successful one, but for me, success looks like where you've done it in one place and you've been able to show its value and then expand out to other places.
So stepping back, you've got examples in your career where things work, where it don't. You're constantly learning and evolving. Change is quite a model-based business. You see all the different models that organisations or individuals will follow. We've now had the last 8 months where change is easy. It happens at the click of a finger.
Just like that.
Yeah, just like that. So if you're reflecting on all those things, what are your lessons? What have you learned about what you're going to take forward to your next change project, or that you could advise people who are thinking about changing how they approach what they're doing, changing their learning culture, changing the way their business approaches learning, or any other change they're wanting to make happen?
Yeah, I think I've always had a bit of a love-hate relationship with models, right? I think the only people that genuinely enjoy talking and debating about all the various models that exist in change are change professionals. If I went and talked to Joe Bloggs on the street, hey, there's a model of change, it can help tell you about how to navigate. Most people wouldn't really care. If you took that to an organization, most people wouldn't really care. So I think there's a tendency for us to get caught up in the theory and the models, and then try and use them to sell the value of change. Whereas what this period has reinforced for me is that there are always problems that an organization faces, and they're numerous. You know, wherever you go, you can go and speak to anybody in any organization. There'll be operational logistics, lots of different, you know, cultural issues. And all of these models, frameworks, tools, techniques, knowing them is a means to being able to help a client solve a problem. They don't need to know the detail. What they need to know is that the problem can be solved. So where models, frameworks, tools come in is it gives you a range of things to try and help fix a problem. Where you go into an organization and you take one tool and you keep doggedly reapplying it, independent of what that, you know, that client is going through, what the outcome they desire is, just because it looks and feels the same, is where you kind of get frustration. I think that you kind of, you know, really cause, to some extent, change management sometimes to have a bad name, or, you know, change practices to have a bad name, or a model to have a bad name. So I think, you know, if you're a practitioner and you've got a tool bag full of these different sort of models, the hardest thing is figuring out which bits of what model are going to be needed. And in order to do that, you have to have a conversation with a client and understand what some of their challenges are. And some of that might be about selling and or at least positioning how some of these models can help. But the one size fits all, I've never bought into, because it never, you know, no area of your life does one size fits all unless it's a hat. For me, that's where, like, it falls down. And I think what I most love about kind of models is that they, with a lot of learning, for me, it's about having a conversation, sharing different views about what you think is happening. And in order to do that, you need sometimes a common frame of reference. And so models and frameworks are really useful for that, a common frame of reference you can talk around. So again, everyone probably now knows Kubler-Ross, right? Because it's been shared a gazillion times over the past, 6 months about, the emotional journey we might go through when we experience change. I don't think even Kubler-Ross today says that it was never intended for organizational change, and actually no one goes through all of those emotions in sequence, and you might not experience any of them, or you might experience some that aren't even on here. It's not the point as to whether it's fact. It's the point you can have a conversation with someone to say, look, we all experience emotions when we're going through change. And one way of thinking about it is this sort of, curve of, your energy levels or your emotional state. And, does it help to talk about where you are on this? And if it does, maybe we can have a conversation around that and how others are feeling about it and what they've done to deal with that. Because that's how you get real change, right? Like when you can connect to the thing you're struggling with, and you can talk to others about how you might navigate it and what practical steps you can take. The change curve is not going to solve everybody's problems, but it will allow you to have conversations with other people that might share some of your thinking. And I think, this is what tools and methodologies sort of are helpful for. They're not to describe fact, right? Like no organization works like, Kurt Lewin's model or all the other models that might be out there. So I think it's just, for me, it's always been about a tool bag. And no, the real art, maybe the same in sort of learning circles, is the real art is knowing which one to use when. What is virtual learning right for this thing? Is physical learning right for that thing? Do we want to, do a workshop where we bring everyone together and then split them out into groups? Like all these different dynamics, like they're all the art of committing learning to memory and turning it into something bigger than just knowledge, right? Or information, should I say, and turning it into knowledge. Yeah, so that I think I have a love-hate relationship with models. Usually hate them when I'm talking to other people inside the profession, love them when I'm not talking to other people outside the profession.
I think it's the same, if you look at learning, you'll get people who, turn up with their one way of delivery. Maybe the last few months that has changed that. So they're looking from a silo perspective of, you've got a problem, I've got an e-learning course for that, or I've got a face-to-face, or I've got a leadership development problem, because that's what their comfort zone is, that's what their business is, that's that's what their role in the organization is. Sometimes, you know, their role is to be delivering leadership development programs. Doesn't matter if the presenting issue is not solved by that. Sometimes you get that as the solution. And I think you then got people who are coming from different perspectives and thinking about the learning science of how everything's put together. And, you know, that can be all very well, but, you know, it can be the best design program, but if it's not right for the things we talked about earlier, it's not the right time, someone's not actually got any use for it. You know, there's got to be a balance where people bring that pragmatism. And, you know, to me, the real things of having the art and the science conversation is around context. Because if you can't have the science of your models, but be able to have some art of contextualizing those, because there is not a one size fits all, just because it worked in a similar organization somewhere else, or that's what you did on the last project. I think it's that constantly evolving approach, because, you know, learning, change, organizations are a complex tapestry. And I think if it's having those in your toolkit and then having the skill to apply them is where I see really strong learning professionals come to their fore.
Yeah, and there isn't this sort of arbitrary construct, right? The organization, like if you go into your own world and you think about things you want to change, you think about what capacity do I have, where can I learn the information, and, you know, am I willing to commit the time, you know, and you know, there is this sort of kind of wider world around you, which, you know, is your life, your family, your friends, and all of those sorts of things. But when we go into an organization, it becomes really sort of, I don't know, samey, restrictive. It's all a bit formulaic, and it's that, like, and maybe it's because that most organizations are inherently, you know, maybe if I talk a little bit in change management, you know, when we talk about change, about kind of the purpose of a change, the mission, the values, and all those sorts of things that kind of connect people to why we're doing this specific thing. I think that element is skipped over really quickly in organizations when it comes to learning. And that for me is where we're sort of missing a trick a little bit, because it's skipped over because time and money are the things that drive most organizations. And if time and money is what's driving it, that means there's a deadline and there's a cost, and therefore, you know, learning can't happen in this natural kind of like osmosis reinforcing way. It has to happen as a point in time, and then you set that person off in a direction and there they go. Whereas the reality is, in your life, that's not how it works, right? You make a change, but you have to do lots of little things. Someone used the example recently of moving home, right? There's the formulaic process of moving home. I can't remember if maybe it was a conversation we were having, but there was a formulaic, you know, you move home, but then there's the subtle changes you need to make in your routines, whether that's getting to, you know, the train station when we were allowed to travel, you know, understanding where things are, how long it's going to take you to get to certain destinations. All those little changes happen after the big change, right? Of the physical moving home, of the physical learning. You've got to reinforce that time and again, and you commit to doing that by having made that big commitment. But we don't do that in organizations. We don't reinforce those things that we learn in the big bang 2-hour, 2-day, 2-week long residential course, right? We sort of go, great, you've got it, see you later. And what exacerbates it as well is I have seen people being given courses and no opportunity to exercise that learning. So, you know, again, you know, I'm guilty of it. I did a course in June, and the content was really good. I just haven't really had time to think about how I might apply it to some of the stuff I'm working on. In fact, I did another course recently where I did exactly the same. They're both on my to-do list, don't get me wrong. And it does pop into my mind again, how might I bring those things into it? But the reality is most people go and do a course and then they come back into their day job, and, you know, the further away their application of that learning gets, it's almost like you've lost the value in it. But you did tick a box. Right? We're back to box ticking, aren't we?
I think, you know, human nature is learning is always on your to-do list. It's just quite often at the bottom, and it takes that emergency, that pressing situation, that real, you know, moment where you think, actually, I'm going to change. I want to get that promotion. I'm going to move there, or there's an opportunity there I want, and suddenly that becomes more urgent. You know, there is a very small percentage of the population who learn for the love of learning. You know, I mean, we might all like consuming knowledge and knowing things, but you know, to go and suddenly decide I'm going to learn to do something requires commitment, dedication, passion. You know, whatever your hobbies happen to be, you know, some of us have all got half-started hobbies, or we get to a level, you know, reaching that true mastery that people talk about. People reach the level that's right for them, you know, a level of enjoyment, you know. And even going back to your, you know, your house moving analogy, I think when we go through change, sometimes we do the big structural change, we take them through, and then we land people in that bit where actually no one's thought about where you're going to put everything in the kitchen, or the understairs cupboard doesn't quite work, or the nursery's 20 minutes in the wrong direction to the train station. So how are you going to make those logistics work? And those are the things that afterwards you start to go, now I understand that. Now I'm in the real element. And that's sometimes where, you know, you've got multiple people facing the same problems and not sharing their answers or trying to help each other, or you just leave people in the dark and you walk away and go, we've declared victory, and someone's there still trying to work out how they do those things. And you can go back, you know, some people will be very good at solving those challenges for themselves, and other people are still going, actually, I'm walking 5 times around the kitchen to make a cup of coffee because I've not got that mindset of being able to go, well, that's how they train me on the system, but maybe I should do this, or should be a tweak, or there's another process, or the existing process we use with this system in now needs a tweak in my job role that no one else thought about. And it's all of those little things that can cause fatigue, or even just, you know, next time something comes along, because it may have been perfect, but that person on the end goal isn't given permission or doesn't have that drive to actually go, I'm going to fix that myself.
And I don't know if you, I mean, the idea of, you know, lots of people talk about the kind of learning culture in an organization. Continuous improvement comes up a lot. The reality is very, I've never seen any organization, unless they are genuinely like quite small, you know, like 20 people, 50 people maybe, where that could possibly be the DNA of the organization. And so obviously as that grows, it becomes sort of really much, you know, sporadic. It's kind of leader type stuff, you know, you kind of instill in your people in small pockets in an organization that's the way you can be effective. And that, you know, even again going back to that example of the house, like, you know, like, where's the support, where's the time, where's the space for people to kind of think, okay, well, now I'm here, what else is changing? What support? What did we not think would happen, and now I have to deal with? And where's the capacity for that? So yeah, so this notion of sort of like having, you know, a mindset of continual learning, it's just not embedded in people when they go through their careers. And, you know, by saying it doesn't mean people they might naturally get it. They might, oh yeah, of course, why wouldn't you be like that? But the reality, like with any change, is it's actually quite time consuming to implement, and it requires quite a lot of dedication. It requires quite a lot of energy. So, you know, it's really important to support people going through that process. And good leaders do this naturally, and organizations with good leaders benefit from that. But the reality is leaders that have gone through sort of that old style of like consume knowledge, consume information, you know, that's relevant to kind of getting the next step up, that doesn't create sort of people who have a learning mindset, right? Like it creates people that have a sort of goal, objective mindset, which is very focused on moving up in an organization. So it's got very narrow focus. So yeah, I think, look, we talked quite a bit a while ago. We did a study, and there was sort of quite a lot of talk about the need for change practitioners to be resilient and reflective in their sort of key behavioral traits. Resilience, because, you know, you will deal with challenging situations and you'll need to come out the other side having navigated it. Reflective, because no doubt there'll be stuff you'll have learned through that process which will stand you in better stead for the next time you are faced with that. And those two things, you know, call out for great kind of, not just change practitioners, but great change agents, great change leaders, right? Like those two things really stick out, and they kind of make sense, but they're sort of backed up with a little kind of straw poll of people we surveyed, which had this sort of quality of assessment of being good practitioners by the work they've done through their clients. So client feedback. Yeah, really interesting kind of dynamic. But that learning culture always gets me. It highlights to me at the moment is I don't know how we're catering for that on the job experience. Like, it's okay for me as someone who's an experienced kind of person working in offices and joining new teams sort of, you know, regularly, to figure out how to make that work virtually. And because I know what I'm doing, I can go in and I can kind of do that. But if you're graduating from university and you're having your first job, right, and that kind of like learning by doing and just asking that question, like that for me is, I don't know what the replacement to that is. And I don't, maybe, you know, again, maybe a more digitally native mindset is open to that. Maybe that way of learning is fine. But for me, putting myself back in that position, I'd be like, wow, I would really struggle with this way of working if I was trying to learn what I'm doing. And so, yeah, that for me is sort of like, there does need to be an evolution of some description, right, about how digital learning works for all ages. And again, going back to, it's not one size fits all, but who's doing the hard work to figure the balance out?
And I think that's, you know, coming back to one of the points we talked about earlier, I think that's why it's not an easy flip to Zoom and some online content, is because there are all of those contextual issues of what's changed in the working environment, you know, what's changed in our leadership. You know, you might have been a great leader in the office, but you're struggling now. What do you do? How do you find that balance? And, you know, people will put online courses on and, you know, you cover lots of things, and there's been a wealth of wellbeing courses and various other things, but how are people evolving? How are we supporting them? How is that feeling right and comfortable for people? How are we monitoring and evaluating that when you do your next big change project? And we may still be in a similar situation to we are now. How do you do some of those engagement things that you might have done in a different way? I think those are all things for us to learn as we go through, and, you know, take the best of what we've done before and come back to the intent of what we're trying to achieve, and maybe question ourselves, because maybe we didn't do some of those things so great in the past anyway. You know, maybe our leadership when we were face to face wasn't brilliant, but, you know, now we're further away, that could be even worse, or it could be better. Who knows? You know, it's really sort of unpicking what we're trying to achieve with each of those things, and just trying to test ourselves and help people through those processes.
And I think maybe, you know, like, it's easy to see from my perspective, it's easy to see how these things can go wrong, because I've seen organizations sort of call in change practitioners, learning practitioners, to help resolve something that was not previously thought about and is now critical to the success of a project. And so it's easy to see where, like, we could miss the opportunity to learn from this. But I do think we will. I think enough people are having the conversation. It's all about the scale, isn't it? Like, there'll definitely be some wins to this, and people will change the way they think, the way they want to work, what they, you know, where they work, how they do their work. All of those things will be challenged. It's like, to what extent will we make that happen? Like, at how big a scale? Because, you know, it could be huge. It's just, we're fighting against probably the natural thing, which is people want to just get on, right? They want some sense of, after such an upheaval, right, they want some sense of normality. They want to be able to go back to it. And, you know, there'll be organizations looking at, like, you know, lots of loss of income, needing to kind of recoup that. So how can technology? So there'll be lots of kind of dynamics at play, which all come about profitability and kind of also getting the best out of your people. And that's not an easy discussion to kind of manage. And then you try and scale that. So I think we're at the right time to be asking all these questions. It's like, how committed are people to really doing something different? That to me is kind of like, you know, discussions like this, it makes me think of, what do I do more in my role? And I know you're on social media, so what do I do more myself in terms of the kind of posts I put out? All of these sorts of things are to try and spark other people to lead that sort of a change. Like, how do we take the very best of what we've learned, right, and combine it with what was already good and come up with the workplace, whatever version we're on, right, 4.0, 5.0, whatever it happens to be. But how do we make work for people and still benefit organizations? That is ultimately what change learning is focused on.
So Ket, thank you very much for joining us today. If people do want to connect with you to find out more about the Change Management Institute or anything else, what's the best way of them doing that?
Yeah, so you can get hold of me. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm quite active there, so come and find me. Ket Patel is the way my name appears on LinkedIn. So come and connect with me. You can also reach out to us at ketan.patel@changemanagementinstitute.com for any of the institute related stuff, and you can also visit the website changemanagementinstitute.com. And then lastly, if you're in need of any change advice, again, I'm one of those two approaches, but you can also check me out at Marlowe Consulting. If you just punch that into Google, you'll be able to find it pretty easily.
And we'll put all of your connection details below the podcast as well. Thank you very much.
Cheers, James. It's been an absolute pleasure as always.